What is up, everybody, and welcome to episode 70 of the Trainer Scoop podcast. And today I'm very excited and happy to be rejoined for the second time on the Trainer Scoop by Mr. Bryce Calvin. Bryce, say what's up to the people, man.
How's it going, everyone? Let me turn this up real quick so I can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, dude. Appreciate you coming through once again. It's been, like we said, almost 3 years since we've done a podcast here on the Trainer Scoop, and a lot of growth for both of us in between those times. So definitely looking forward to delving into it, to picking your brain. But yeah, man, I'm just interested for my own sake and for all the listeners' sake. What's been new? What's been exciting lately?
So we actually just finished and soft launched an app that we've had in the works for I don't know. We've been talking about it for a couple of years. We've been actively working on it for 8 months. Finally got it all done, rolled out, and yeah, now we're opening it up pretty exclusively to one of our partners, and they're allowing a lot of their clientele to go in there, test it out. We're getting a lot of feedback on it, but that's the biggest thing that we've been working on for quite a while. Mostly just because it's going to kind of change the way that we operate on the business side of things and how we actually fulfill our clients. So it's a pretty big one. Outside of that, just do a lot of change up, not necessarily on the front end of stuff where we're changing what we're doing with clients. That's just pretty rigid, pretty consistent. I think our clients probably appreciate that. But in terms of business stuff, man, just continuing to learn how to do things differently, how to be efficient, how to stop making dumb mistakes all the time. But just with a purely remote business and trying to coordinate, operate with a lot of people spread all over, it introduces challenges that I feel like I'm never going to ever get comfortable with solving. It's just new shit every month that we consistently try and patch holes in, and then the following month, following quarter, following year, it's just more stuff. But yeah, outside of that, just continue to build stuff. A lot of it is not super exciting for most people. I'm sure that they would be listening to it, but continue to build stuff, continue to put a lot of content together, streamline a lot of the things that we're doing, try and make our services cheaper, more seamless, easier for our clients to manage and handle. And yeah, man, yeah, just continue to kind of build on the back end.
That's what it's all about. Yeah, dude. And I know you're just so diligent with those things, and that's why P2 is here for the long run. I love that you have those things in mind and you're constantly trying to improve just the experience for your clients, because so I feel like so many people let that kind of slip over time. And how many years have you officially been kind of operating under P2?
Yeah, so P2 was incorporated in 2019.
Okay.
But I was coaching people outside of P2 without really anything formal for years before that. It only got to a point where I was like, okay, I should probably create an actual business around what I'm doing. It got to that point probably in 2018, 2019, and then I just kind of dragged my feet and did it in 2019. But then I want to say that 2020 was whenever I actually really rebranded everything I was doing, and officially publicized that, hey, this new thing is called Progressive Performance. It's not just called Bryce Calvin, because I don't know, there needed to be more of a formalization to the things that I was doing. And I'm not a big fan of people naming their businesses after themselves. I don't like that. So, if your business out there is called, John Smith Fitness, please fucking change that. Be creative. But yeah, I didn't want it to be Bryce Calvin Training, Bryce Calvin Fitness. So yeah, Progressive Performance just kind of took off in 2020. But yeah, ever since then, we've been kind of evolving what it looks like, continuing to try and build off of that initial framework that we put down way back in the day.
Yeah, dude. That's so funny you bring that up, because I've been throwing so many names back and forth in my mind of changing the name of my LLC. I'm damn, I did not have this foresight back in 2021 when I originally filed it. So that's going to be something I do, because yeah, like you said, it's just scalability and growth probably isn't easiest when it's like DMart Enterprises. So I feel that, man.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I've noticed is there's like a lack of perception and professionalism in the online coaching space, especially.
Yeah.
So whenever people name their business after themselves, I feel like it continues to perpetuate like, hey, this is a hobby rather than this is a business. Like if you
Yes.
own, yeah, I mean, if you own like, I don't know, like a technology business, right? Like you sell computers, I don't know. You're not going to call it like David Martin Computers. You're going to come up with some like dope ass name for it, right? Like no one wants to buy a computer called David Martin Computers. Like you want to buy something that sounds official as shit. You want to be able to tell your friends like, oh, I have an Apple computer. I have a Dell. I have a whatever, right? I guess Dell technically is named after the creator, but you get the picture. So like you want there to be something that is more marketable and like allows people to talk about it and stokes more interest. Progressive performance, I feel like in retrospect, I could have done things and I would have done things different with the naming. It's too long. I don't like how long it is. So that's another kind of hindrance to getting that name out there in marketing. There's a lot of things that you learn the longer that you do it. But yeah, step number one is probably naming your service, naming your business something that people want to talk about. And it's not just like pulling teeth to try and get people to refer in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, dude. You brought up well, also something that came to my mind while you were talking about that is remember when Trump was like Tim Apple? I
Dude,
was
I mean,
like,
well, part of it too is like, I don't know. I like origin stories for business names. Maybe that's just me being like a super nerd, right? So like the origin of Apple, actually, I think it's more accidental than anything, just from like my understanding of the origin of Apple. But there was like this weird mythology around that they named Apple because Alan Turing, who is the inventor creator of like modern computing, he committed suicide by eating a cyanide laced apple. So that's actually how he killed himself. But there was like a myth around Apple, the company, that's why the name was Apple, but it actually wasn't that. It was just a weird coincidence. But shit like that, right? Like if that would have been the origin of that name, that's crazy cool. Not cool-ish, but it's crazy creative, right? Like it gets people talking about it. I'm talking about it right now, and it's not even the truth. So the more that you can have stuff like that behind your business, whether it's the name, whether it's like the logo, whether it's the, I don't know, the motto, whatever you want to call it. People like shit like that, you know?
yeah. Yeah, dude. It's crazy, man. So I went back and rewatched the podcast that we did from 2020. It was episode 14. And I haven't been like always super consistent with the podcast over the years, but it's still crazy that I'm on episode 70 with you
Yeah.
now. And dude,
Congrats,
like,
man.
oh, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
I just like I really don't think Bryce of 2020 would have had this like maybe maturity in business and just like how well informed you are about how this stuff works.
Oh
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like 2020 was the turning point for a lot of people. Like in my life, 2020 was a big turning point in a lot of different ways. Obviously, we had, COVID, which I feel like that kind of woke everyone up to, hey, like, maybe I need to rethink the way that I'm doing a lot of different things because life is pretty fragile, right? Like the way that we know of life, the way that we live is kind of fragile. And I think that made that pretty apparent to a lot of people. So that was one component. Another component was my wife and I separated in 2020. So that was like another big life event for me. I had a few other things happen that were pretty big deals for me. We don't really have to go into those. But another thing, obviously, was, I really, really pushed and promoted, branded like P2, my company. So that really took off and blew up, and I started having to be more business focused. I brought Chris on, who Chris is still with me. That was whenever we really started to expand. And I think 2020 was just one of those turning point years for me. But whenever we had our conversation back then, I was probably like still in the middle of it in a lot of ways. I was actually thinking about this earlier today, where in a lot of ways, 2020 didn't really feel real. It felt like kind of a mirage of a year in a lot of ways. And And then 2021, I felt like there was the rebound for everyone, where everyone was so fucking happy to not be locked inside their homes. Everything was open again. We're able to see our friends. We all have our stimulus money, so we're able to spend on stupid shit. And it felt like life was good in 2021, you know? And then 2022 was like, oh shit, maybe that was all kind of a fairy tale. Maybe let's drop back down to earth. And 2022 was a difficult year for me, for a lot of people. 2023 is trending towards still being a little bit challenging for a lot of people as well. But I was thinking about this earlier, that end of 2020, when everything started opening up again, and people were feeling a bit more back to normal, and then also in 2021, it just felt like life was on easy mode for a bit, and I got really cocky on my own bullshit back then because my business was blowing up. It felt like in a lot of ways things were just falling into place for me, right? Like I wasn't necessarily doing anything to have those things fall into place. It just felt like everything was working out the way that it should. And I was very, happy, confident. I again felt like I was kind of on top of the world back then. And then 2022 definitely like kicked me in the dick. It woke me up to a lot of things. Had a lot of stuff not go the way that I was hoping for, or that I was expecting it to go. Business, personal life, friendships, a lot of that stuff. And that kind of made me come back down to earth and be like, okay, maybe it wasn't me in 2020, 2021. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe some of it was me. Some of it was taking advantage of right place, right time. But I still have a lot to fucking learn, right? Like in that conversation we had, I'm sure in my head, I was probably like, I fucking know everything. I know what I'm doing. Like this is going to continue on forever. Like I'm going to be able to, do this, do that with the business. Like it's going to continue to accelerate upwards to infinity, right? I just wasn't game planning for hardship back then, So I honestly think that having to deal with some really difficult times in the past couple of years has matured me a lot, for better or for worse. But yeah, I mean, I've had to learn a lot of stuff, a lot of different things, way to approach business, way to approach friendships, way to approach relationships, way to approach a lot of shit. I'm also old now, so I'm almost 30, which I guess with age comes a little bit of wisdom, which hopefully hopefully I can actually say that that's the case with me. But yeah, man, another thing too is I've definitely made it more of a priority to stay on top of learning, just continue to educate myself, not only just about fitness. I've definitely blown out of my fitness only bubble, which I lived in for quite a while. I've taken interest outside of fitness. I stayed more on top of current events, obviously business, but also if you're a business owner, you have to know what the fuck's going on in the world. Not just within your niche, you have to know what's going on in the world. If you're getting less clients, is it because people have less money because the economy is slower? You need to know that, right? Are we in a recession or are we not in a recession? That's a big fucking deal. If people are losing their jobs, they have less money to spend, and you're getting less clients, you're making less money because of that. You need to know what to do. I feel like a lot of people they live in their bubbles. They keep their head in the sand. And whenever you own a business, at a certain point, if you want to continue doing well in business, you have to realize that your knowledge base has to extend beyond your niche.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
long-winded.
Dude, no, that was good. That was really good. I have a question that just came to mind. So let's say the 2008, 2009 crash happened this year. How would your business change?
It would not change too much, luckily, because a lot of the people that we have currently are most likely going to stay with us regardless, right? What really was very challenging is whenever we had something like COVID happen. So I think COVID was my business's, 2009, 2008 financial crash, right? That's what COVID was for me. And we made it through that, but barely, fucking barely, because gyms closed, right? My business is based around training people. So if gyms close, no one wants to pay for that, right? So we had to adapt really quickly to that. And back then it was just me. So I had to adapt really quickly to what was going on in COVID. but yeah, I mean, that fucked me over pretty substantially. That was not fun in the moment to deal with. I changed a lot of things within my business as well to account for, hey, if there is some kind of like COVID related catastrophe or COVID like catastrophe that happens again, where, you know, people don't have access to gyms or something like that, which kind of renders my business in a lot of ways not obsolete, but definitely diminished. Or like the offering that we have definitely is diminished in that case. We've put some redundancies in the business to account for black swan events like that. But if, let's say, like there was an economic crash or depression or something like that, yeah, I mean, it would hurt fucking everyone, right? But I feel like we've built the business up to a point now where it's not dependent on any single thing, to where we would survive. It would be hard for everyone for sure. Like we would have to cut back. We would probably have to rethink a lot of the ways that we spend money, which, you know, is never fun. It's never fun to have to think about, like, you know, letting people go or contracting your business or anything. But yeah, we would be okay. I don't think a lot of other businesses, especially in this space, would be. What tends to happen whenever there's less money to go around is everything kind of centralizes around the biggest and best in that business, or in that niche, right? In that space. And things start to kind of monopolize. So what would happen is all of the fragmented single owner businesses or single employee businesses, the people that are, hey, they're the John Smith Fitness, they're themselves, they coach, you know, 20, 30 clients here or there, they make, you know, $50,000 a year. Those are the people that would get really, really impacted, because a lot of those clients tend to move away and go towards the bigger companies, because the bigger companies have higher profit margins typically and are able to kind of undercut everyone else, to be honest. Like they have offerings that allow them a little bit more flexibility to survive contracted economic times, where there's less money to go around and people less willing to kind of dish out that money. But yeah, man, I actually think that's going to happen anyway. I think that the online space is too oversaturated to begin with. There's no reason why there should be, you know, 1 million online personal trainers at this point. It got oversaturated because of 2020 and 2021, where people had so much money to spend and they didn't know how to spend it. But I think even like the last couple of years, you're kind of seeing that die down. A lot of people who like left their 9-to-5 jobs to become online coaches were like, hey, maybe, you know, can I have my job back type of thing, which is totally okay. I don't want to diminish that, because I think it takes a lot of I don't know the right word. Humility is the best word I can think of. It takes a lot of humility to admit that you might have made like a rash decision, or you might have made a mistake, especially whenever it comes to career choices like that. But I definitely think there were a lot of people who jumped the gun really quickly, assuming that just because they had a $10,000 month, that they were going to have $10,000 months forever, and that they could quit their 9-to-5. Take it from me, it does not work like that. You know, it definitely dries up relatively quickly, and then people tend to kind of consolidate.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you've told me about some of the swings in your
Yeah.
business, even though how, you know, well thought out you are with it. So that's a very good point for the online coaches to take away, is I guess just make sure you're taking those preemptive measures. And then, you know, like we've had the conversation too, where you're like, it's okay to go work another 9-to-5 to do something that's like not necessarily in the fitness industry, but
Yep.
still do coaching and do content to some capacity, which is like really good for me to hear. So many of the gems that Bryce dropped on me over the time of the internship and mentorship that I completed with you, and I kind of wanted to talk about that too.
Yep.
I know it's not something that you're like currently doing right now, correct?
No, I definitely pulled back on it, mostly because I was so concerned with like getting this app built and put
Hmm.
together, and I just didn't have the time to spread myself any thinner than I currently was, or than I currently am, than I was then. So in a perfect world, I want to be able to jumpstart the internship and mentorship here again as soon as I can. Um, but it is all going to be dependent on like having everything inside of the business in a way that I feel comfortable being able to kind of take a lateral step away from the day-to-day stuff, away from building of the products, the normal calls, the normal email correspondence, the normal bullshit that I have to do on a daily basis with work. Once all that dies down, if that ever dies down, then I'll feel comfortable adding on something else to my plate, like internship or mentorship again, because I do enjoy that. But there also is the opportunity for someone else within P2 to like step up and want to run that, and because the material, the structure is there for it. It just needs someone to kind of be there to run it, oversee it. So I would like to have that pop off again, because I think that it is nice to have more faces in the business, more conversations, more ideas flowing, and the internship and mentorship is a good way to get that stuff going. But yeah, currently on pause.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. And oh man, I feel like I've told you this if I haven't. Thank you for doing that, because that shit was crazy. Like it was so good. Man, it's like better than, I can't think of a better like learning experience that's out there, even in like an academic setting. Like what you did and what you put together was seriously impressive. And you like did it like for free. Like there was really not a ton of benefit for you. So like how did you justify that when you first started it? Like what was your rationale?
Yeah, so it initially, the idea in my head was we're going to have the internship mentorship be like a pipeline for assistant coaches. So
Hmm.
essentially, we allow people to go through both of those processes, and then for the select few that make it through and that are kind of like the overachievers that do really really well, that integrate well with the coaches, with the team, they would have the opportunity to become an assistant coach with us. As I kind of moved a little bit further away from like the assistant coach dependent business model, I realized that that wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to do as much. I didn't want to just continue to bring on more and more assistant coaches, essentially what I'm saying. But I really enjoyed the camaraderie associated with like the internship. I enjoyed like being there, being able to teach, being able to like help people through stuff. It's nice also just to have the break in my monotonous week. So anybody who's like an online coach, like I do this full time. I've been doing this full time for quite a while. I work from home. I most of the time work by myself. Like it's a pretty fucking lonely job. So it is great in a lot of ways. Like I can walk outside and just do whatever the fuck I want 90% of the time. Like I'm not, I don't have anyone looking over my shoulder. I don't have to clock in, clock out, but it can be kind of lonely. But with that too, like having stuff like the internship and mentorship in my work week, it was nice because it's something a little bit different. It wasn't just me staring at a spreadsheet. It was me being able to talk to people, me being able to like help them through their problems. And it was also good for me to like refresh on a lot of the things that I felt were maybe starting to like fall off in my own capabilities, whether that was like programming, coaching. It's just always good for me to refresh that, or, having conversations with people. I would say something, or maybe someone else would bring something up. They would be having an issue and we would talk through that issue. And I'm like, fuck, man, we're having this issue too. Like I need to apply what I'm talking about, like in my own fucking business, So a lot of those things I thought were really good. In general, I think that communication, correspondence, like proximity to other humans who are smart is a really, really good way to continue to breed and grow ideas. And it allows everyone to benefit from that. I work really well alone, but at the same time, like problem solving and getting shit done alone is really, really challenging. So the internship and mentorship was really great for me to be able to do that stuff. And obviously, like I enjoyed being able to help other people with their shit too. So yeah, initially it was a little bit more of like a selfish reason. Like I said, I wanted to have people be assistant coaches for me, but then it turned into a little bit more of like, all right, this is just fun. Like this is more fun for me than just sitting behind a computer, like looking at a spreadsheet by myself all day. So that's kind of what it was for me.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And man, like I said, it was a great experience. Taught me so much that I would have never really been able to learn unless I paid like, I don't know, the big bucks to go into like one of those coaching programs. So appreciate you, man. That was awesome. And I kind of wanted to rewind it back because I got so sidetracked in all the growth we're talking about. But on the last podcast that we did, dude, it's just crazy. Like I heard so many things. I was like, damn, like that's so cool that he's doing things a little different now. So like one of your responses to my question where I asked like, how do you go about like learning and further education? You're like, oh, I don't really have time to read. So I do a lot of like podcasts. And now I see you reading all the time.
Yeah.
Um, how did that interest get sparked in you? Because like you've noted how it's important to stay well versed about a ton of things outside of just the fitness industry. And I see you reading about like some wild shit all across the board. So how did that start?
Honestly, it started kind of randomly. Like I I think before 2021, um, I hadn't like read a physical book in fuck man, like probably since college. And a lot of the reason for that was like I was just so burned out with like forced education from school, like all the way through high school. I didn't enjoy reading. I didn't enjoy going to school. I didn't enjoy pretty much any part of school. And then in college, I mostly just fucked off. Like, yeah, I did well enough in school, but it was never something like I wanted to be doing. I'd much rather have been doing other shit the entire time I was in school. Um, and whenever I thought back though, like whenever I was a kid, I was very like intrinsically motivated to learn. I enjoyed reading. I read a lot as a kid. I chose reading above other activities whenever I was younger. And then at some point it just died off. And whenever I got to the point, I think it was like 2021, I got to the point where things in my business were static. Well, not static. Static's the wrong word. They were controlled enough. They were controlled enough to where I wasn't waking up with like, tons of stress and anxiety, feeling like I had to jump right into work at 5 a.m. every single day, going from bed right into computer work. I started to develop a little bit more of a consistent routine around I can wake up and just kind of like, ease into my day. So I started trying to figure out what I could put into that gap to like allow me to build a routine that was somewhat productive. I went through a period where I was like very like productivity focused and like trying to like build as much as I could into my day. So I just kind of like started reading. And at first it was like fucking pulling teeth. Like I couldn't sit still. I couldn't focus. Like my brain was all over the place. And then the more that I did it, the more that I just allowed myself to calm down, be very present with what I was doing. I wasn't like thinking forward to all the shit I had to do that day. I wasn't thinking back to all the things I didn't do the day before. I was just in that moment reading with a physical book, like old fashioned as fuck. And it was nice. And I realized like how nice it was in that moment to not be worried about work, not be worried about all the shit that I needed to be doing that day. And I hadn't had that feeling for a very long time because I was so overwhelmed with everything in life. But literally just I built this routine around waking up and reading. And at first it was like, 20, 30 minutes. And then over time, it just grew and grew and grew. And now I read for like a substantial amount of time every morning, but it just became like I enjoyed that time of quiet so much that I wanted to continue to build around that and extend it. At certain points, it has turned into very much like productive procrastinating, where I'm procrastinating work and I'm doing so by reading. And because I'm reading, I tell myself it's okay because it's productive, but it's really just procrastinating. So I've had to kind of find that balance there as well. But yeah, I think that everyone should read. Like, obviously, I think everyone should read. There are a lot of things that you get from sitting down with like a physical book that you don't get from an audio book, you don't get from a podcast, you don't get from scrolling and reading articles on your computer. And part of that for me is just that it's that quiet, it's that disconnect, and it's that forced doing something like presently and keeping your brain, your attention on that, rather than just being wandering and just always anxious, always thinking about the next thing. So for me, reading has kind of allowed me to do that. And one of the reasons too, like I'm not super focused on reading things that are specifically like growth or business or health, fitness, whatever, is because I want to be able to disconnect. Like I want to be able to choose something that I want to be doing rather than if I'm reading like business or self-help books all the time, it's going to feel very much like I'm doing this because I feel like I have to do it for some greater reason outside of just I want to do it. And part of the reason why I choose like these kind of like out there books is because if I'm reading it, then it's because I actually want to be doing it, not because I feel like it's benefiting me in any intangible way.
Yeah, dude. Man, there's definitely something to be said for that because that burnout from trying to always consume some type of like constructive material, whether it's like
Yeah.
you said, business, self-development, even like furthering your fitness knowledge. It just gets to a point where like there's a negative return on your time investment, and like you start to not want to do your like duties as a coach. It's like
Yeah.
just a slow downhill decline. So that's a really good point. I think for anyone that's like, trying to still like have a productive leisure activity. Because I think you mentioned this in one of your podcasts. Maybe it was the podcast with like Liana or Mario. By the way, love the podcast, man. Everybody should go check out the P2 podcast. It's really good.
Thanks, man.
And you were talking about just like how like the breath work type of stuff, and how reading is like a good just departure from our typical day to day, where on the phone with the short form content, it's like your brain is just switching from one thing to the next so rapidly. Being able to just take a second, chill, breathe, read, consume something that's a little bit more slow pace is really a good reset.
Yeah, and one thing that I noticed really, really pronounced for me was that I struggled with like disconnecting from my normal life and focusing on one thing. I struggled really hard with doing that because I was so used to just kind of pinging back and forth between a lot of different tasks. I was looking at one thing and I'd like scroll over to the next tab or move my window, or I'd like text someone back or answer an email here and there. Like I was just so used to like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I never had an opportunity really to like just be focused on one thing only at a time. And reading was great for me for that. Again, like you mentioned, like breath work or like meditating. I think that's great for people because it really just forces everyone to slow down and it forces you to not do anything, right? So like, I think we struggle with not doing anything. That's a really, really big challenge for most people because we're so used to very fast-paced lives. We're always switching back and forth between something. I know that there are often times whenever I'm like waiting in line or something and I can't not look at my phone. Like if I'm waiting in a line, I'm looking at my phone or I'm doing something with my hands. Like I can't just sit there still and like look ahead of me. Like that feels like torture to me, right? And I would imagine that most people probably feel the same way, right? Like if you're just sitting down or if you're waiting for something, you need to be doing something. You feel like you have to be doing something. It's like this tug, it's pulling you towards that. Reading, great for just allowing your brain to take a break and just focus on one thing at a time. I found writing is also another really, really great use of that. Writing for me is actually much better. Like if I can get a 2-hour block where I only focus on writing something, it is the best thing in the world for me. It's purely meditative. Like I'm actually able to condense and consolidate a lot of my deeper thoughts on any kind of like subject. I'm able to put words and sentences together that I didn't even fucking know I had in my brain. Like there are a lot of things that you can do whenever you sit down and just don't allow yourself to be distracted for like an hour or two. It's obviously very hard, right? But like, I don't remember. There was something that I read. I don't remember who said it, but they talked about how they would just sit like in a dark room and just sit there and breathe. And if they had an idea or if they had like something that they were really struggling with coming up with a solution for, they would just sit there and they wouldn't allow themselves to do anything until they figured out the answer to that problem or until they came up with some kind of solution. And I was like, that sounds like torture, absolute fucking torture. But I get it, right? Because whenever you're always distracted, it's so hard to come up with an answer or come up with a solution or think critically because we're always just so surface level. We're just back and forth, back and forth. But you'd be surprised at like how knowledgeable you are about different things, how deeply you can actually think, how critically you can think if you're just undistracted for a bit. Like a lot of shit bubbles to the surface whenever you aren't constantly going back and forth.
Yeah, dude, that was like a tip that you gave me in maybe like when we were doing the mentorship. And I would always be trying to like edit a podcast while I was programming or
Yeah.
like listen to a podcast even. And yeah, it's just like you lose so much like ability to focus. One, be productive, but two, actually like put out quality work if you're like constantly switching back. And it's like a great feature and also a terrible feature that all these MacBooks have like the messenger on there, because it's so easy to just send like text back and forth. And so I always have to put my stuff on do not disturb if I'm trying to program or if I'm like I mean, same thing as you with the writing. Like I'll start out a morning here and do some stuff and then write like a post, and it'll take me like 20-ish minutes, and then I feel so much better throughout the day. Like it is like a really good meditative thing.
For sure, man. Yeah.
But yeah, man, I appreciate you kind of like expounding upon all the growth that I noticed since that like 2020 podcast, because that's something that like, see, when I first like met you back in the day at 614, right, I was like, holy fuck, this guy's strong as shit. But to see that there's like this like very like growth focused, like just you have a very good way of thinking about things, is like, as poorly phrased as that is, like I really respect that about you, man. And like just to see the changes and how that's, kind of, I would say you would probably agree with me when I say like you've become a better person and your business is doing really well too.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that I've become a better person.
Not that you're
Yeah.
a bad person.
Well, I think it does take a specific type of self-awareness to realize like that you just have flaws as a human being, right? Like outside of all of my business related flaws that I had and like everything that I was wrong about whenever it came to like fitness and training and nutrition and health and all that stuff. I had some human flaws. Like I was not the best human being in the world. Um, and again, like I think everybody at some point hits like a turning point in their life where some shit pops off and you realize like, hey, I can either continue doing the things that I've been doing and continue to get the same results, or I can do some stuff differently and hope that things go better in the future. And I got to that point. Like I said, my wife at the time, my ex-wife now, and I had to, like we separated in 2020. That was like a big life event for me, and that forced me a lot of ways to rethink a lot of things that I was doing, the way that I was acting. And part of it too is, like you said, I used to be like a very big, strong dude. I wouldn't say that I'm currently a big, strong dude anymore.
Dude, okay, real quick. When I pulled up the YouTube, I was like, holy fuck.
What?
You were
Wait,
so
what?
fucking big, bro.
Oh, dude, I know. Yeah, wait, you are you talking about like the video that we recorded last time?
Yeah. It was like
Dude, that was
August of
even in
2020.
2020. That wasn't even like me at my peak either,
Oh
which is
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I even in 2020, like whenever we recorded that, I was definitely like what 250 or something. Like, I mean, I was still a big boy back then.
Mhm.
I think right now I'm like 220, like sitting around there somewhere. I mean,
You're a
I'm not,
good 220 though.
yeah, I'm not
Solid.
small. I'm not small, I guess, but definitely not as big and strong as I used to be. But yeah, for anybody who's not watching or who does not know who I am, like I'm covered in tattoos as well. So I think that those like physical characteristics combined with just like natural stereotypes about meatheads, people with tattoos, people with piercings, people that look like me, um, being very dumb. I like whenever people assume that I'm dumb, and I I think that part of the reason why I'm like I enjoy learning and why I enjoy like um proving stereotypes wrong is because I intuitively understand how I look, right? I understand that most people will see me and automatically assume something about me, whether that's about how I act, whether that's about like my intelligence, whether that's, whatever, right? But I like people being wrong about me with their like initial assumptions. And I continue to get more tattoos as well because I think that it's even more fun to have like these like prison tattoos. Um,
The
but
funniest shit that had me rolling was when you were at the library and you were like, no one
oh,
bothers me because
bro,
they think I went to prison.
dude, no, I go to this library all the time, man. So it's like right down the street from my house. I go there all the time to work. At first, everyone there was like super skeptical of me, and then now they're all my homies. Everyone loves me. I talk to the librarians all the time. They're chill as fuck. I have my spot in the back corner. No one bothers me. It's dope. Like I love it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, like there, especially being in the fitness industry, right? Like I think that there are a lot of really loud personalities. There are a lot of people who are very unwilling to say that they're wrong about anything. They'll defend their positions to the very end, whether they are wrong or whether they're right or whether the evidence is continuing to stack against them. Like they just get louder and louder and louder. And, I used to kind of be that person. I used to be very much like, I'm right, you're wrong. And I still might mostly be right. Like I like to assume that I'm right more than I'm wrong. But I'm now definitely much more willing to agree that there's a middle ground and to agree that I might be wrong. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually think that being wrong is a good thing now. Like if you're right, you don't gain anything from it. But if you're wrong, you learn something, right? So so you actually want to be wrong more often than you're right, because then that's just more opportunities to like, learn shit. But yeah, it's being in the fitness industry is very difficult. I think a lot of the personalities in the industry are hard to deal with. Um, Part of that too is you have to always portray this persona of knowing what you're talking about at all times and always assuming that you're right. Because if you're in any way in the middle, or if you play like that gray area, then it's really difficult to build like an engaged following, right? Typically, like the cult leader-esque type of personalities are the ones that have the largest followings, the most loyal followers. You see this all over the place, but especially in the fitness industry, because of how extreme everyone is and how polar everything is. So maybe I've given up some of that ability to have like a gigantic following and have like this cult leader-esque personality behind that. Just because I've been a little bit more, I guess, nuanced in the way that I'm thinking and approaching stuff now. But every once in a while, I still like to tell people that they're fucking stupid and that I'm right, and like, all this shit. I like to do that every once in a while, but maybe not nearly as much as I used to.
Yeah, dude. Oh man, I think one thing that like I don't know if you kind of like intentionally taught us this or taught me this, but I kind of like secondhand learned from you is like just yeah, like understanding that you might not be right and that there's like that there's a time and place for anything, like let's say specifically in training, and that intent is what is probably most important.
Yeah.
So some things that kind of like come to my mind, um, when we would go through like making like practice mesocycles in the internship, and you were like, this kind of like branches away from the framework of like what you traditionally see like coaches do, but that's okay. And like if you have this intent conveyed, which I think your system does a great job of conveying intent, which is probably the hardest thing to do with online coaching, and you like acknowledge that like this might be untraditional and it might not always be like right compared to other standards, but like it works. And obviously it works because you have some very successful clients as well.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with health, fitness, training, nutrition, supplementation, whatever, right? Like there's no right answer there. I mean, I think that this is the crux of my argument with everything is there's no right answer, right? You ask someone how to build muscle, you can't give a right answer to that because it's layered. It's very complex, right? The context behind everything in this space matters. So, because there is no right or wrong answer to pretty much anything, even the most basic questions, it's all contextual. It's all based around the intent and the goals and how you're actually applying what you're trying to do. So that's one of the reasons why someone can give me an answer, and if they can defend that answer, then that's right to me. Like that's cool for me. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
It might be unorthodox. It might not be the way that I would do it. But if you tell me something, if you're like, hey, for calves, we're going to do lat pull downs. And the reason we're going to do lat pull downs is because whenever you hook yourself into the thigh pads, you actually do a static contraction of your calves to push your thighs up into that thigh pad. We're going
You
to fucking
sold
grow
me.
we're gonna grow our calves that way. I'd be like, unorthodox, maybe, but might be worth a shot. You might have talked me
Right.
into this, right? So
Right.
so I'm not willing to write off anything until I have a reason for that. I've seen a lot of things in training, in nutrition, in fitness in general work whenever I was like, there's no fucking way this is gonna work. And I've seen a lot of things that I fully expected to work very well not work for whatever reason. So you have to be super dynamic. You have to just always be on your toes. You always have to be very quick to pivot, especially whenever you're working with a dynamic population. If you're working with high level athletes, if you're working with human beings in general, because human beings will always fuck shit up, right? Like we're not working in a lab. And I think that this is the biggest thing for me that always gets lost. And it's always hard, even for me, whenever it comes to like scrolling on social media or like following influencers that will put out a lot of really, really good scientifically backed information. Whenever I see a lot of that stuff, the only thing I can think of is, man, that's great, but like it doesn't fucking matter if most people can't follow this, right? Like, I love a good scientific study as much as the next person. I love optimization as much as most people, right? Like, it's great for me. But the reality is, whenever you're working with people in the real world at a large scale, like most shit is just not going to work. And most things that you assume are going to be great will probably have to be modified at some point. Any structure that you build in longer than like a week will most likely not work. It'll all fall apart because people just are, they struggle. They struggle to do anything correctly, right? Like, that's the reality of the situation. Even in a lab setting, right? Like whenever most things are controlled, it's still really, really challenging to filter out all of the static, all of the creeping variables that come into play. So in the real world, it's damn near impossible. So if someone is like, should I do 2 sets or 3 sets? Should I do 10 reps or 15 reps? Like, dude, who fucking cares? Just train hard. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. Just train hard.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, deload. Make sure that you're eating enough protein. Drink a lot of water. You're probably going to be pretty good. You're going to be better off than 90% of people if you can just do those things consistently over time. Most clients, most coaches, they overthink to a point where they're missing the forest for the trees, right? And I've been at that position before as well. And I think these are like the conversations we probably had during the internship and mentorship, like quite a bit, where I'm like, dude, it's great to know like the nuances. I love knowing like the nitty gritty shit, right? Like, I think it is super important to know. But once you know that stuff, it's also really important to like zoom yourself back out and be like, all right, cool. I know all this really great granular detail, but I'm never going to use 90% of it. Like, it sucks to say that, right? But like, there's a point in like fitness knowledge and like exercise physiology, kinesiology. Like, there's a point that you get where 50% of the information. You probably don't need to put in the effort to get to 100%, unless you're going to be like a professor. You're going to be writing like research scholarly papers. Once you know most of it, you pretty much know all of it whenever it comes to working with real populations in the real world. So then it's better to just round out your skill set, round out your knowledge base, rather than trying to go from like, I know a lot to I'm the most knowledgeable in the world. It's not worth the time, effort. Like, there's always gonna be someone smarter than you. There's always gonna be someone reading an extra paper. There's always gonna be someone with more time. Like, rely on other people to give you that information. And especially if you're like a business owner, especially if you're trying to do this on your own, like you need to be able to expand beyond the like a lot of that super refined detail. I know this is getting super off tangent, but
No, you're good.
yeah, hopefully that answers whatever question we started with.
Yeah, yeah, dude. No, that was really good. Like, those things, as they were in my mind and you were saying them, which is pretty, I mean, that's awesome. Like, that's a great conversation to me. So I appreciate it. So I wanted, like, last serious topic of the podcast, I wanted to
Yeah.
get your perspective on something. We talk about that whole conversation, and one thing, for some context for the people that might not know me super well, I'm pretty bought into like Renaissance periodization, the RP way of doing things. However, I'm starting to see some dogmatism there, and it's just kind of like a turnoff for me, especially after learning from you. And so, like, the example that I'm specifically seeing, and it's applicable to you, Bryce, because your main clientele is building some bomb ass bikini athletes. One of the big judging criteria, to my understanding, in bikini is delts. And a lot of the RP crew lately have been shitting on pressing for delts. And like, even to the point where like, there's this bodybuilder, he's pretty well known. I'm not sure how much you follow it, Bryce, because I know you got better shit to do, but his name is Justin Shire, and he was doing like a Nautilus machine press. And so Jared Feather like went on his post just like out of the blue. It was like, you actually don't have to press, like yada yada yada. He's like,
Yeah.
I have big shoulders and I just do like lateral raises and shit. And I was just like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
okay. And then like people in like the Team Full Round forum, they'll like espouse that as well to like newer members that are just kind of learning. And I'm like, all right. What are your thoughts, man? I'm curious.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I would agree. You probably don't have to do any exercise or any pattern to develop a specific muscle, especially a muscle as specific as the delts that get hit from a lot of other like tangential movement patterns. Whenever they're like the secondary muscles, right? Like, granted, you're probably not going to develop really, really awesome delts unless you train them specifically. But I mean, dude, I've seen some powerlifters that haven't done a lateral raise in their life, or maybe they've done some, but definitely not to the degree of like a bodybuilder who's focusing on their delts. They're powerlifters that have some fucking huge delts, man. I'm not going to appeal to authority like that. I think that's obviously like not the best example, but it is, I think, it's prescient because at the same time, yes, lateral raises in general, direct delt movements, like any kind of raise, upright rows, whatever, like those are going to be great for building delts. I also don't necessarily think that you need to just completely throw out an entire movement pattern because it might not be the best for a specific muscle group, right? So let's say delts are already hit by incline presses, they're already hit by heavy rows, they're already hit by upright rows, by lateral raises. You don't need to do any overhead pressing. I mean, would your physique be better by adding in overhead pressing every once in a while? Like, maybe, maybe not. But at the same time, I don't think that doing good, efficient, non-destructive on joint overhead pressing is a waste of time. I don't think it is. And granted, too, like especially for the clientele that I work with, right? Like I work with a lot of bikini competitors. A lot of bikini competitors aren't doing a lot of horizontal pressing movements anyway, because we're not trying to build up their chest. We're not trying to build up their triceps. You can say the same thing with a lot of like female competitors in general. Um, so really the only way that we get in pressing volume is high incline overhead pressing, right? Granted, there's going to be a lot of variation within that. So do you consider something like a landmine press an overhead press? I would. I think that's a vertical press, but it's definitely a little bit on the edge. It's more of a hybrid, right? You can throw a lot of things into that same category of this is very close to vertical, but also not really a pure overhead press. I've seen this argument made a lot in the past where overhead pressing isn't necessary to build big delts. And I agree with that. I actually do agree with that, right? But I don't think the overhead pressing is useless. And I think that there's a big distinction there to be made. I think that if you can find benefits in a movement pattern or in an exercise in general, then it has a use case for being in your program. If someone already has gigantic delts and their delts grow very well from lateral raises and upright rows and rear delt flies and, you know, just regular incline presses, yeah, don't do overhead presses, right? Like for me, I didn't do overhead presses for a very long time, and I still do very little overhead pressing. But I also would say too that if you cut out overhead pressing early on because you're someone who is trying to build your delts up, you have a lot of like horizontal pressing volume, you have a lot of like tricep volume that you're getting in, you don't want to waste anything on overhead pressing because you deem it like lesser than in importance, well, you're going to lose that overhead mobility really quickly too, right? So that's not a good thing to lose overhead mobility either. I would say that continuing to do an overhead pressing pattern just to maintain your overhead mobility is worth it to keep that pattern in, right? That doesn't mean you're doing a seated barbell overhead press, but something like a pike push-up, something like a single arm landmine press, shit, maybe even like a Z press, right? Like these aren't directly correlated to delt growth, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that like an overhead press is a useless movement. And they definitely will target your delts to some degree, right? Various levels of delt simulation. I would say that in terms of best movement for delts, I would probably give like a machine lateral raise to that if we're talking about just like a side or your side delt. But I don't know, man. I'm very against just telling people that they're doing shit wrong because I don't do it that way, right? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with like dogmatism. It's like, can you see the other side of this argument? Like, can you see the other person's potential use case for why they're doing something? If yes, like, dude, just fucking leave them alone. Like, just let them do their thing, right? Like, unless someone is coming at me and like attacking me, saying like I'm doing everything wrong, like, I'm just not going to go out of my way to start like an argument and tell someone that they're doing something wrong, right? If someone is like round back deadlifting and it just looks like complete trash, and after a while, I'm like, hey man, like, you continue to do that, it might hurt your back. And if they're like, oh, fuck you, man, if they eventually hurt their back, I'm like, you're probably fucking that up. You're probably doing that a little bit wrong. Like, technically, I would not do that. Maybe you shouldn't do that either. But there's a difference between that and like just telling people that they're fucking shit up or they're doing something wrong just because you don't do it that way, or that's not what you tend to use, or that's not the methodology that you like to employ. Again, going back to what we were talking about a second ago, if there's anything that we know about training, it's that a lot of things can work. And another thing is that there are a lot of things that work with certain body types, certain people, that don't work as well with other body types and other people, and vice versa. So for me, an overhead press might not be the best movement to grow my delts. For a 5'4" woman who doesn't ever train her chest, that might be a great movement for her to grow her delts, right? Because she has a ton of pressing volume that she can tap into because she's fresh as fuck. She hasn't been wasting all of that energy on horizontal pressing. I know that's a very specific example, but just in terms of like RP stuff, I love Israel. I think that they're incredibly smart. I love what they've been able to do over the past 2 years, like building up RP as like a content brand. I think that they've done things mostly the right way. But I definitely agree with you. Like, one of the reasons why I started really like moving away from RP in general, and like in terms of my own ideology and the way that I think about training, is because of the dogmatism. I was just noticing a lot of like, this is how we do it, and anything that is outside of this is wrong. And I don't like that, and I see that with a lot of other people, a lot of other coaches, a lot of other companies as well. And so it's not just RP. But in general, I think it's better to be flexible in the way that you think about stuff. Assume that you don't know everything. Assume that at some point you're going to be proven wrong. And then it becomes much easier to walk that back in the future. But if you continue to like dig your heels in and say, like, this is how we do it, that means this is right, eventually someone's going to prove you wrong. And you're going to look fucking stupid whenever they prove you wrong. Just be flexible. Be like, hedge your bets. Be like, hey, like, this is how we do it. That's how you do it. I can see your point, but maybe there's some potential for there to be a middle ground there.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that last point that you just made, that's like, I mean, it's honestly great to base your life philosophy around that. There's always going to be the ability to learn and to be able to like walk yourself back rather than find yourself caught in that weird like trap is a much better place to be. But dude, yeah, I appreciate your insight on that, and just overall like good conversation, reflecting back on the growth. I know, like, man, I was listening back to like the questions I was asking on that original podcast we did. I was like, holy fuck. And I had a shitty mustache, bro. It was the trifecta. But yeah, man, I just appreciate you taking time to come back on the podcast. Something like what, 56 episodes later, still doing your thing, still killing it. And I just appreciate all the lessons I've been able to learn from you and everything that you're doing out here.
No, man, of course. I enjoy having these conversations with you. We probably should have recorded a few of them that we had during the internship and mentorship, because I feel like those would have been some pretty good ones that we could have posted at some point too. But yeah, dude, I would love to be able to do this again with you in the future. So whenever you want me back on, just let me know.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely do it, man. But we'll let you get on with your day. I'm gonna plug all the links to Bryce's socials down below. So please go check out all of those and follow him and support the P2 brand because he's doing good stuff. But dude, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon, man.